Hello everybody, welcome back to Expedition Homestead. Today's episode is going to be a really cool one. We're going to show you guys our entire backyard tour and the progress of all the different plants that we've been putting in. That's going to include our vegetables, our compost area, willow trees, elderberries, and then a couple of different oaks and fruit trees as well. So today's episode is going to be jam-packed. Make sure you guys stay tuned because it's going to be a fun one. First off, we've got all of our raised vegetable beds that we built. As you can tell, there are 9 of them right now. We have built 7 of them last year, and then 2 of them we finally got around to building this year. I'm going to show you guys what we did last year. Was we've got a free load of mulch from our city's department where they do the brush pickup every Monday. So I just called them and asked if we could have a load of mulch. So what we did with that dump truck full of mulch was we laid out about 6 to 8 inches of mulch throughout this entire area, the footprint of where we were going to have these raised beds. And then after that, what we did was build the initial 7 raised beds, and we put 6 inches of mulch inside of those raised beds as well, so we can start breaking down those wood chips and creating a base for our soil to go on top of. We've had incredible results because of that. We have some great fungus colonies that are starting to develop and root themselves in the garden bed. So the fungus is really going to help basically a transfer of nutrients and then moisture retention in the soil. So mycorrhizal fungi is really, really important. And the wood chips that we put down is going to be very helpful when it comes to that. So we're going to start over here and show you guys the vegetable beds that we've got. This bed right here is going to be our perennial fruits and vegetables. So we have rhubarb that we planted last year. And then we have some strawberry plants right here that we're going to put in this year. I'm going to make a video on that, and that's why they're not in yet. We just happen to have a couple of extra cabbage, so we have them growing in there as well. This bed right here, we have 2 double rows of peas. So we have snow peas here and then snow peas here. Essentially, these peas are going to vine into each other and support each other. So I will put a couple of sticks up the middle and some trellis systems to get those peas to grow. But all in all, we have 4 rows of those. And then we have a whole bunch of kohlrabi. We have a couple of different kinds. And there's a white Vienna kohlrabi. I think it was called a red Vienna kohlrabi. And then we also have a Cossack kohlrabi. If you notice, we have more mulch down on top of the raised beds. We just got a new load, again from the city again, totally free, just yesterday put on these beds. You okay? What I will do is once the seedlings are tall enough to grow above the mulch, then I will lay it all down. I'll put in about 1 inch or 1.5 inches of mulch on the beds. What the mulch is going to do is break down, it's going to feed microorganisms, and it's also going to retain moisture and life in the soil. If you notice the soil where we don't have any mulch, it's obviously a lot more dry than the soil underneath where we have the mulch. So that's going to benefit our plants really, really well. And it's just a technique that I've been using ever since I started gardening. If we look to nature, we see that things, branches, leaves, sticks, twigs, organic matter from the season before falls down onto the surface of the soil and then is broken down. So I really want to duplicate that in our gardens here. We have a few rows of corn, and then beans will be growing intermittently with that corn. The Native Americans actually used to grow what was called 3 sisters. It was squash, corn, and beans all together in order to, one, they help feed each other because they're different types of fixers when it comes to the soil nutrients. And then if you imagine the corn grows up, and then the beans start to vine around that corn and uses it as a support. So we also have, we've got some more vining beans over here. And then we have bush beans planted right here. These are just seeds, not sprouted yet. This bed here is going to be all tomato plants. We've got purple Cherokee tomatoes, beefsteak tomatoes, Rutgers tomatoes, and then a super sweet 100 tomato as well. What we've got these posts here on the side for is we're going to put one main leader across the top, and then from that line we're going to drop down separate lines, and we're going to be trellising our tomatoes. So we're going to be growing them to a single stem, pruning off all of the suckers and any side shoots, leaving one stem growing all the way up with these indeterminate varieties. Here in this bed we have red acre cabbage and then stonehead cabbage. We have 12 heads over there, and then this half is our lettuce. It's just barely sprouting up out of the soil. It's a tiny little bit. I'm surprised they didn't sprout a little bit earlier, but that's why we don't have the wood chips on here. Let's move on to the next bed. Again, you've got to get really close and look at these onions and garlic. They look wonderful. And we actually put these in the ground as soon as our nighttime temperatures were above 24 degrees. Not 32 degrees because it was still freezing when we put these in the ground, but anything below 24 degrees I wanted to avoid. Generally, I find that the really cold hardy crops do fine as long as it's above 24 degrees and not going to be that cold for multiple nights. And these onions and garlic are doing really, really well. I had mulch on these ever since we planted them because we planted sets of onions and garlic. So they were above the soil by about ½ inch when we planted them. So we were able to get mulch in, and I think it's doing a great job at keeping the soil health as high as possible. Right here we have an entire bed of carrots. Since they're a root crop, we try and grow them by seed where they're going to stay permanently. And so these, just like the lettuce, are just barely coming up. I think it's because we've had pretty cold temperatures. Today is the 15th of May, so we are just now getting nighttime temperatures regularly above 40 degrees. We actually had a freeze a couple of days ago. So once the soil temperature heats up a lot more, we get 60-degree soil temperatures on a regular basis, then I think these carrots are going to take off. But right now, just a little bit slow because of the temperatures. Over here, the same thing with the temperatures as far as our beets go. The beets didn't seem to sprout as well as our radishes. So we've got beets all over here and then radishes on this side. I'm about to put mulch over the radishes because you can see that they're about 1.5 inches tall, so those are ready. But the beets just haven't quite came up yet, unfortunately. You can take a really close look at them right here. There's some of them sprouting up. We can see the rows. All in all, I think we've got about 12 sets of beets that are coming up that are growing above ½ inch, but for the most part, the rest of them are just barely coming out of the soil yet. Once soil temperature rises a little bit more, they should begin to flourish. And our last vegetable bed, we have broccoli in the mulched portion. Then we're gonna have peppers in this corner right here. And the entire back row is going to be cucumbers. We've got the seedlings growing downstairs. The varieties that we're growing for the cucumbers are Wisconsin SMR and then straight 8s. Of course, if I see a cool variety in a garden center as I'm out around looking, I might pick up 1 or 2 of those. We are going to be growing these up in a trellising method as well. We've got this chicken wire. This is the larger chicken wire. It's not a tiny little grid, and that's going to allow it to grow to the point where I'm not going to have a ton of cucumbers stuck in between these grids. So what I will do is, as they grow, I'm going to put them over on this backside and then have them trellis on the backside of this so that as the cucumbers grow, they're going to kind of be hanging off this side for me to just pick as they come. So it's going to be really, really easy. And if you've never grown cucumbers on trellises before, I highly recommend it. There's no other way to go about it because you use so much less space. If I were to grow these cucumbers on the ground, they would definitely take up this entire bed, if not a little bit more off on the sides. So by growing them vertically here, it helps the structure of the plant because that's what it wants to do, is a cucumber wants to vine, and it's also going to reduce the amount of space that I'm using when growing these cucumbers. Now, one thing I want to do is, if we can take an overall look at this garden bed, I want to show you guys what we did as far as the layout and why we're growing certain vegetables where we are growing them. It's because we've got this direction is south, so we've got north, east, south, and west. So the sunlight is going to be coming over the garden in this fashion. So we have our rows oriented from south to north, and we're also growing our shorter crops on the south side and all of our tall crops on the north side. That way, as soon as our cucumbers grow, our giant tomatoes grow, our corn and long beans also grow, they're not going to be casting shade over the garden beds behind them, where if I had them up in front, they're going to be casting a lot of shade. So we've got all of our short crops up on top, our root crops here, more root crops, cabbage, lettuce, root crops, peas, and then we've got our taller ones in back. Just a quick tip for you guys. So now we'll go over here and show you our compost bin that we made essentially for free and show you what we've got going on over here. These compost bins we've just made out of free pallets, and one side we've got a bunch of extra mulch from the drop-off that's going to break down, and then I'm also going to throw in some dirt and compost in with that over time. And then in the first one, this is the one that we started putting scraps into last year. This is a great way because I can store a ton of compost in these two, and it was free to make. So really it doesn't get any better than that. This stuff will break down very quickly, and I actually use like a no rules composting. Anything I've got, I just throw it in there. I don't worry about the ratio of greens to browns, your nitrogen and your carbons. I don't worry about any of that. I just throw it in and compost as much as I possibly can with those. Now over here, these feedlot containers that we have, they're gonna be our herb garden. So we've got all sorts of herbs growing in here. The first one we have is a sage plant. This is going to be a perennial. Hopefully it survives our Wisconsin winters. And then I'll be looking for different herbs to plant in here as we go throughout the garden centers. In this one, we have winter thyme. Then there is lavender hyssop, Greek oregano, Italian oregano. This garden bed has lemon balm right here. They're tiny, look up really close. So here are the tiny little seedlings. We grew these by seed along with the lavender hyssop, the Greek oregano, lemon balm right here, and then here we've got a few different plants of chamomile that we'll be growing. Here is our basil, a apple mint, and then we cannot forget the dill. We're probably gonna need some more dill for all the different jarring that we're gonna do and fermenting and pickling. But for now, we've just got one cute little plant. We've had these in ever since our nighttime temperatures were regularly above 32 degrees. I didn't want it to freeze too harshly on these. So they withstood a freeze a couple of days ago just fine. But when I was getting them established, I made sure that we had a few nice overcast, pretty moderate temperature days without freezing nighttime temperatures. So I want to tell you guys about what we did to fill these beds right here. It's something a little bit special. I think you guys are going to find it pretty interesting. These are pretty large. They're about 2.5 feet tall and let's say 2.5 feet deep by 4 feet wide. So that's going to use up quite a bit of dirt. So we use the hugelkultur method when filling these up. So if you're not familiar with that, what that means is basically we took a bunch of logs that we cut up from the backyard when we cleared out a lot of the trees in these growing areas and chopped them up to sections that fit inside this container, and then filled up the container about halfway full with those logs, sticks, and branches. Over time, those are gonna break down. Again, same thing as the wood chips. They're gonna be feeding the microorganisms, breaking down, feeding the fungus colonies, and in turn, creating healthy plants for us. Now we've got a whole row of different trees and plants that we're gonna show you guys that we're putting on this back side of the yard. This is a kefir pear tree. We're gonna have sunflowers growing all in the soil area. Hi. We've got a little weeping willow tree right here. Our large weeping willow cutting, this was the biggest willow cutting that we've ever taken, and incredibly enough, it's growing. If you take a really close look, it died back because we got 30-degree temperatures like the day after I planted it, unexpectedly, but as you can tell, it is sprouting. We've got different sprouts coming out all throughout this entire thing. So all in all, it's gonna be just fine. We have another weeping willow right here, all from cuttings, of course. This is a wine sap apple tree, so it's got really beautiful pink flowers on it. And then we're gonna mirror the same thing on the other side, as we've got a row of sunflowers growing right here. These are gonna be mammoth sunflowers, so they should get huge. This is a Fuji apple. And then right here, if you notice all of these buckets, what we're going to be doing is growing all of our extra tomato plants and then some zucchini and squash out of these buckets. These are food grade buckets that we picked up at Walmart for $2.96. So a very cheap way to grow. And one of these can support one squash plant, one zucchini plant, or one tomato plant in a 5-gallon container, no problem. So instead of growing in a raised garden bed, this is another really cheap solution if you have a small area that you want to grow in, or maybe like you're in our situation where you had some extra plants and you've got nowhere to really put them. I didn't want to till up any ground anywhere, so I'd rather just grow in these buckets where I can easily amend the soil how I want to. Right here, we've got giant stumps of where we had cedar trees growing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that were the branches were about this far back, all the way up to right here. So if you can imagine a line going all the way to that other fence on the west side of the house, that's how much space was taken up by these cedar trees. So last year we cut those all down so we could utilize that space, and we're definitely going to utilize that space. I almost forgot, we also have an elderberry tree right here. So this area right here does get pretty wet as when we get lots of rains. All the neighbors' yards kind of flow down this way, so we get a lot of water. So we have a swamp oak planted right here. This obviously is a tiny little tree right now, and it's going to take a long time to grow, but eventually it's going to be a big, beautiful swamp oak. Now right here, we are really excited for our chicken coop. We built this this spring. It costs $800 because lumber prices are absolutely through the roof. I paid about 4 times as much as I should have for this thing just because of the price of lumber. But we've got the chicks downstairs growing right now. They're a few weeks old and they're gonna be out here pretty soon. We've got 6 chickens to be grown back here. They are egg laying chicks. So we're very excited to bring you guys some more episodes all about chickens, raising chickens, how to take care of them, how to harvest eggs, etc. On this chicken coop, we got an automatic opener. So this senses the daylight and opens up at dawn and then closes before evening. So that way I don't have to come out here in the morning and nighttime to let the chickens out and then bring them back in. It's all going to be done by the door, so that's really helpful. Our chicken run is going to come straight off the chicken coop, and then we're going to angle it in this area where the cedars were growing. We're probably going to think about growing a couple of more elderberries in the area because elderberries can be a really, really great food supplement source for the chickens. There's some great articles out there on how beneficial they can be. So we're going to think about that and then look at a couple of different plant varieties that we can grow with the chickens that's going to be beneficial to them. So all in all, we're really excited. Our 4-year-old son and then our 2-year-old daughter are both very excited to grow and raise the chickens as well. They're already having a blast with them down in the basement, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Lastly, we have the front of the house. We have a couple of different trees that we planted out here, some bushes and perennials. So let's check out this before I go for the day. Last year we created this garden bed area. They had a couple of bushes up here. We ripped those out, dug an outline here, filled it up with, again, those free wood chips. And we've got all sorts of perennials in here. These are my tomatoes that are going in the garden pretty soon. So perennial plants, some hardy rosemary, a couple sedum varieties, some phlox, ferns, and then we're gonna have hardy gladiolas planted all up in here, and we've got some iris and stuff over on that side. Also up in front we have another Fuji apple, and we also planted a Granny Smith apple. The Fuji, Granny Smith, and wine sap apple are all in the same flowering group, so they're gonna help pollinate each other to make sure that we get fruit every year. I just did a simple 4x4 setup around here, and then we've got the corrugated plastic tubing just to keep the mulch away from the base of the tree. Last thing over on this side, we've got 4 more elderberries, and then this row right in the center here, we've got 6 of the basket weaving willows. We just put them in this year. Very excited for those. I've been growing the cuttings since last year. We grew them in those little containers like that, those containers. And now we just put them in the ground this spring. So those are gonna be for basket weaving, you know, the actual branches that they use to create baskets and all sorts of arts and crafts. So we're gonna see if we can sell the cuttings of those and then also try our hand at some basket weaving. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Again, all of this was pretty much done within 1 year, and we remodeled our house last year as well. So we have been putting in a ton of work to this entire yard for you guys and for our family in our little journey to sustainability. Happy gardening, and we'll see you in the next episode.